All right. I think we're doing it. Cool. Hi all. I'm Cassandra Caiger. I'm the engagement lead from Intelligent Futures, talking about resiliency in the food system today. I'll start by thanking you for joining us. Really excited to be giving this talk. It's tough that we can't all be together breaking bread today, but I am very excited to get to deliver this message about food and resiliency. Before we get started, I do want to take a moment to recognize, although we are in different places today, I want to recognize the land I'm on here in my home office / Zenden in Calgary, Alberta, which is on the traditional Treaty 7 territory of the Nisse'pi Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Before we get into it, I'd like to get a sense of how folks see themselves and their work or the role how they impact the local food system. So Mary Jane, if you could queue up that poll for me, I'll ask folks to respond to this before we get started. So yeah, what's your role in supporting the local food system in your current planning position? So select one or more of the following. Do you implement on-the-ground actions and initiatives? Are you regulating through plans and policies? Do you primarily advocate by promoting and lobbying for the cause? Facilitating connections between key players and community members? Or are there other things that you're doing, or maybe none at all?
Okay, Cassandra, the poll's running and we're about 50–60% have voted at this point. So I'll let you know the results as soon as we have everybody getting their votes in here.
Okay. And again, if multiple apply, feel free to select more than one.
We're just at 75% have voted. We have over 100 people online, so it's just taken a minute for everybody to participate.
Maybe I'll talk a little bit about what the agenda will be while folks are still voting, and then we can see those results after that.
Excellent.
Okay. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you some of the experiences, stories, and research that my team and I at Intelligent Futures have had in our work around food security and food systems planning. I'll start by talking about our current food system, primarily the industrialized system, some of the global local challenges we face, and then get into opportunities for planners to influence how food gets to our tables. So my hope is that you're going to leave with some good insights and ideas for how to impact the food system in your communities as planners.
Okay, thanks, Cassandra. We're kind of leveling out now. So for votes, so 20% implement, 48% regulate, 17% advocate, 26% facilitate, and 32% or none. Okay.
Interesting. So lots of regulators, a good portion of facilitators, which is really awesome. You'll definitely find a common thread of making sure those connections and conversations are happening as I talk about some of the roles for planners. So exciting and good to see that there's a spread of folks who are joining us today. So I'm going to start by asking you to think about what brings us together as people. Friends, family, strangers, what is a key thread that links us all? And while I'm sure you'd guess based on the title of this session, it's food. So food gives diverse folks from every walk of life a unique opportunity to meet, connect, and provide a foundation for a whole other level of creativity, all while keeping us nourished and alive. So if food is so important to every single one of us, whether we like the taste of it or not, why do so many people know so little about the food system or even the source of the products they eat? Especially when we know food is a part of the foundation of our hierarchy of needs. It's the base, according to Maslow, in terms of what humans need in order to not perish. Well, The answer mostly has to do with reliance on this pretty remarkable global supply chain in which food sourced in its native or most efficiently growing zone is produced there, processed and packaged elsewhere, and then shipped to the grocery stores and restaurants near us, wherever it is we may be. And as this kind of goes for just about anything, and it really, I find, blows my mind and my taste buds on a regular basis. The global food supply chain is much like other global supply chains, except that we have an immense reliance on this particular system for our survival. And I'm not sure we always think of it that way. I know some of us would now argue our existence relies just as heavily on our cell phones and other consumer goods, but we would truly be screwed if major disruptions were to happen to this particular supply chain. And I'm not only talking disruptions like COVID-19, though interestingly, what COVID has showed us is that there are indeed flaws in the global system, namely with processing and processing plants and distribution, but I won't get too far into this. If you are keen to know more, I would suggest listening to the Money Talks podcast on global food supply chains. This was recently put out by The Economist magazine. But that aside, and above all, what really is hitting us the hardest is the hit to personal income. It's really been the greatest impact to the system in this time. Our access to food has globally decreased during COVID because of cost, not availability. So I'm sure many of you have seen advertisements and promotions about food banks across the country facing these great pressures, with more and more folks relying on charity as income shrinks or disappear altogether. But when I talk about disruptions, what I do more explicitly mean is political and environmental effects. Extreme weather associated with a changing climate, like short water supply, natural disasters, and pollution, as well as political decisions on trade, border crossings, and energy prices. These external threats pose a big risk to our local communities, and I'm not here to say that local and regional food systems are immune to these dangers, but I do believe that having a local system in place will better prepare us to respond rather than react to challenges that come our way. So what is a resilient food system? Well, before I get into what a resilient system is, let's first define what the food system is itself. So many folks have probably heard the terminology farm to fork a lot lately. And it's been a sort of branding or slogan for the local food movement, who are trying to shorten that journey from seed to plate. And that two piece, that's everything from everything between the production of food and the consumption. So our processing, our distribution and access, it's the steps that turn raw products into something more familiar to our pantries. Peanuts to peanut butter, chicken to nuggets, they store, ship, and deliver those items to us somewhere near where we'll consume them. Access in this system map represents both the purchasing and acquiring of food items, as well as the consuming of them. And then finally, in our system there is waste, or if we're lucky, waste recovery, which is where our food is ultimately going to end up. And knowing this and understanding the food system, we can then ask ourselves, what makes for a resilient version of this system? And it's a sustainable one, of course. So to start, we need to ask, is the system sustainable? Does it meet the cultural, social, economic, and environmental needs of people today without negatively impacting future generations? To assess this, I would suggest asking, is the food people are eating giving them the sustenance they need, not just the calories? Are they getting culturally and dietarily appropriate foods? For instance, halal or gluten-free options. Are the foods people eat affordable to them? Or are they really breaking the bank? Are there opportunities for people to come together around food? Are there public and private spaces that encourage the growing, preparing, consuming, and sharing of food together? Where are most of our communities' food dollars being spent? Are Alberta and Canadian farmers benefiting, or is our money going elsewhere? And are there small or medium-scale food facilities that support the community? Can we do some processing that creates higher value food goods closer to home? Would supporting the food system have negative impact on the natural environment? Is there air or water pollution concerns? All things to ask ourselves when it comes to sustainability. So what we know today is we do have a productive global food system. But does it answer all those questions positively? Is it a resilient one? And I would argue no. As we think about the future, particularly disruptions to what we eat, and even the best case scenarios for climate change impacts, it's my belief that our global food system will not be able to sustain itself at the capacity it does today. Most of the industrialized food system is actually designed around the production of meat via either raising of animals or growing of animal feed, which for most of history, like up to the 1970s, meat was really an indulgent and luxurious food item. It wasn't always the center of every meal. So how might we adapt to a world where the majority of the population shift to a plant-based diet? Will the industrialized system be able to turn a high enough profit to pursue mass production, particularly when our agricultural exports are designed around livestock? And I know what you want to say. This is Alberta, and here we eat meat. And don't get me wrong, I love a good steak as much as the next prairie girl does. But the reality is, we as Canadians are eating far less meat already, particularly red meat. As a nation, we've decreased our annual per capita meat consumption by about 30% in just 20 years. And we're still by far more carnivorous than much of the world. And how about climate change? How might we adapt in a world where our key fruit and vegetable providers in places like Mexico and California continue to see decade-long droughts? Will we get the variety of nutrients we need without that source of food? Again, I don't want to sit here and naysay or make claims that the industrialized system is bad. It's just simply not resilient. And sadly, I also can't say that we as planners are going to resolve all of the issues in this complex system, as much as I would love to exclaim that we indeed have complete control and could inevitably shift local demand and thus our economies of our food to exclude that system. As fascinating as a world that might be, it's simply unrealistic today. Globally, the food system represents about $8 trillion of the world's GDP. The local food movement, on the other hand, ranks in the billions. That said, however, Alberta's local food via farmers markets, farm retail, and local food restaurants accounts for $1.6 billion value. So no small feat when you're looking at the province's food system in isolation. This number was based on 2016 reports and was actually said to have quadrupled since 2004. So I like to see this as a super inspiring and demonstrative of demand and momentum for local food that's already here in Alberta. So what I'm going to focus on from here is how we provide space for our communities to have more choice in knowing where their food comes from, the literacy and access to make healthy choices for themselves and the earth, resulting ideally in a healthier, more resilient food system. What I believe local and regional food does is reduces our reliance on this global system so that we're situated to absorb the shocks and changes we can't control. Essentially, controlling what we can to prepare for what we cannot. So to jump into roles, I want to start with a quote that I recently saw from James McCara, the president and CEO of Calgary's Food Bank. He said, "Policy around food does not engage with the established food service charities providing the stopgap. Food banks and food service organizations are experts in the implementation of food safety, public health, and social well-being. We know this landscape and we have the tools to ensure resiliency for all." So this brings me to my headliner of the day. The best role for planners in the local food system: avoid obstruction. Or more simply put, get out of the way. And let me be clear, I do not mean this in a condescending way, nor does it mean planners and policymakers don't have work to do in supporting a local and regional system. It's about being nimble and creative in a traditionally rigid organization to find ways that bring us all closer to our food and each other. It's about recognizing the need for strategies and collaborative actions to ensure continued access to safe, affordable, and sustainably produced food for our local populations. We need to engage key players as well as community stakeholders in the conversation about food so that we're putting effort into actions and initiatives that actually meet the unique needs and respond to the unique matters of a particular community. The problem with facing the food system is it's so complex. So I pose that engagement and dialogue allows us to bite off the chunks that have the greatest chance of success. So with that broadly, what is the role of a municipality in all of this? And to get into it, I want to start by sharing an interesting food system map that pulls apart some of the complex intricacies of this topic. This map from Nourish, which is an educational initiative designed to open a meaningful conversation about food, health, and sustainability, clearly demonstrates the labyrinth of how food gets to us. In this map, you start with sun, water, and seed, and the production process begins. There are, of course, other inputs along the way, including key biological system considerations that are being managed right from the growing stage. From there, though, our food flows into our economic system, which leads to our social system, which inevitably impacts our health system. But of course, what I want to highlight here is the political system. The core actions identified for the realm of government and contributing to the massive moves are regulation as well as civic engagement. And these two are shown as impacting economic and social components of the ecosystem. Look at these core actors and elements in the social and economic realm, and you'll surely recognize these as being part of the municipal paradigm. Culture, education, grocers, restaurants, all items that are addressed in all kinds of policies, from MDPs and land use bylaws to strategic, economic, cultural, and environmental plans. Of course, creating a specific food and agriculture strategy as a municipality is an obvious way to ensure that the food security lens is used, particularly by decision makers. There are indeed opportunities to intertwine food within other community building documents and plans. So challenge yourself. Take a local and regional food system lens when you're working on any and all of your policy and plan development. If you're updating your MDP, creating a parks, rec, culture, or other socially oriented plan, strategizing about your community's biodiversity and natural systems, or planning for the future of transportation, ask yourself, how might food fit in here? With issues like pollution, food safety, hunger, obesity, landfill capacity, and others rising on the agenda of planners, we can no longer ignore the potential of the interventions we can have in the food system. So now I'm going to get into some more specific lessons we've learned for you to use and apply to your work as you see fit. So what is the role of the planner? Well, largely at the local and regional scale, the role again is to get out of the way. Let that ingenuity of industry and individuals find the solutions that respond best to tailored needs of our market. That said, getting out of the way can still mean investing time and energy into removing obstacles to innovation and supporting your community doers in their journeys. So here's the food system again in a more simplified organization. What I'm going to spend the remainder of our time doing is sharing some thoughts, stories, and experiences that we've come across in our practice at Intelligent Futures and share what we believe are the roles for planners in each space. To avoid the anxieties that come with systems thinking and emphasize the three segments of the system that I've personally become most familiar and adept to, we will exclusively cover production, access, and waste. This is not to say there is no role for planners in the processing and distribution side of the system. The challenges, the complexity unto themselves would require a bit more time for both you and I. So production, the root of all food, the start of the supply chain. How does it relate to planning? Well, production is the planting, growing, raising, and harvesting of food, including both urban and rural agriculture. Of course, if you're joining us today from a county or rural MD, planning agriculture from hobby farms to giant commercial crop operations, you already know that food production is an important part of the land use continuum. But what if your jurisdiction is more urban? Does food production really need a second thought? And the answer is yes. As you take a look at this transect we've created of how different land uses or land use areas can support production, I'm going to tell a story about some work we did with the specialized municipality of Strathcona County, which, if you're not familiar, is responsible for a combination of urban and rural residents and land. We recently developed an urban agriculture strategy for this community. And we went in knowing that there would be some hot button issues as urban agriculture was on our radar from some previous food security work we had done. Beekeeping, backyard chickens, even the sometimes controversial municipal-led fruit orchards were conversations that we were prepared and ready to have. And of course, these items did inevitably surface in our dialogue with the community. What we didn't anticipate was that folks in the urban areas of the community were actually finding barriers in establishing something as simple as home gardens. What? Yeah, our thoughts exactly. So we dove further into what we could do to create, we dove in further to see what would be creating this obstacle. And we found that the municipality had bylaws in place that supported their communities in bloom status, which dictated that front yards be aesthetically pleasing. And I know that some of us here may agree that rows of potatoes growing in dirt is beautiful, but like many bylaws, this was open to interpretation and was complaint-based. So for some residents, using their sunny south-facing front yards as a place to grow veggies resulted in complaints from neighbors, awkward conversations with enforcement officers, not a good scene. So our very first action with this client was to review their bylaw to remove such barriers to growing food in urban settings. This was an initiative supported by community and key stakeholders when we brought it back for review ahead of finalizing the strategy. So what can you do as a planner? Well, similar to Strathcona County, you can alleviate these very basic opportunities to grow food by reviewing your bylaws for unintentional consequences against growing food. Again, using your food lens and applying it to not only residential land use planning, but commercial too. More simply put, review the land use and similar bylaws for language that might discriminate against growing food privately and commercially. The 2019 food price report came out. It said, our own new food guide is encouraging Canadians to eat more vegetables. Yet the quantity of vegetables and fruit we produce domestically would need to increase substantially to even start supporting the recommended daily value. And maybe you're thinking, well, will home gardens or small urban agriculture operations really make a difference? And again, the answer is yes. Even with our short growing season, individuals absolutely have the capacity to offset their grocery bills with some homegrown produce. I'm just going to flag, sorry, if we could, with the slides, move ahead to, apologies, the other way. We are on slide 29. There should be image of Victory Gardens, which to my next point of even with our short growing season, individuals having the capacity to offset their grocery bills with home produce, I point to Victory Gardens because this was an initiative, for those who don't know, during World War II, where government was kind of commandeering the industrial food system to send food over to troops of the war. They essentially asked homeowners and citizens to start growing their own food. And what this resulted in the US was 35% of household food being grown at home. And that number was nearly 40% in the UK. So all to say, absolutely, there is opportunity for that to have impact. This also means food policy in Albertan communities need to embrace innovative food solutions and support strategies to grow vegetables and fruit all year round, not just in warmer months. This could include the allowance to and possible incentive for indoor growing, rooftop and greenhouse gardens, as well as urban farming operations. Additionally, we planners can support production through land. So municipalities can take the opportunity to look at their own land supply, find sites where underutilized land might support growth, and ask yourself, are these parcels prime for production? Could they be used for community gardens or even commercial production? Our team has recently had the pleasure of working with a group from the Compost Council of Canada, who were awarded a partnership with the City of Calgary to turn a 15-acre site into a pilot urban farm. The land was previously held for future urban development, but with no prospect in sight, they decided to find a higher and better use for this vacant city asset. So the hope is, if this pilot is successful, it can actually be replicated on other underutilized lands across the city. Again, all to say, we should find and support new and innovative ways to grow food in our urban centers. From the home garden to farms, every bit does matter. Finally, in terms of production, there's intermunicipal planning, which is also important to the supply chain, particularly for production. Rural communities and urban centers have a symbiotic relationship, but it does need to be nurtured. Calgary and Edmonton have the benefit of regional partnerships that help guide some of that discourse, but others may be left on their own accord to make sure dialogue is open between neighboring municipalities so that we ensure there's always access to productive farmland. In our experience with the Calgary Regional Partnership, having a combination of food system experts, policymakers, food makers, and politicians from across the region, we were able to come to a common ground and understanding of the various community needs and desires. Also, the Prairie Climate Center out of Winnipeg had recently put out a great piece on climate resilient cities in which they said, a vibrant local farming industry close to city limits encourages urban-rural linkages and understanding about how food is grown. It also shortens the food supply chain, making them simpler and more adaptable to climate shocks. So if you can't do anything else, you can advocate to your leaders why this is important. Help them see the urgency for local food and create that political buy-in. Next, I'm going to jump to access. So food access is the accessibility and affordability of food for consumers. In 2019, a national survey suggested that 87% of Canadians feel that food prices are rising at a rate faster than their household income. And the reality is that some folks are having to make very difficult household decisions in order to feed themselves and their families. I mean, this is not a new trend by any means, as food insecurity at the household level has been a headliner for Canadian food security for as long as I can remember. I can distinctly recall being moved by a commercial that I saw as a youngin' about a mother opening a can of some sort and then the power going off, and then a sort of reverse scene where she closes that food item and the lights come back on. And it made this really haunting point that some folks have to make really hard choices between different essential needs and services, and really food shouldn't be one of them. Even our provincial food security advocacy group, Alberta Food Matters, which operates the growing food security network here in the province, they typically focus their efforts and resources on the production side of the conversation, but have shifted gears to supporting access to food for children who, due to school closures, may not be getting the sustenance they need. And although we cannot dictate what people eat, how people get their food is hugely impacted by planning decisions. I'm sure most people here are familiar with the term food deserts. If not, these are areas that have limited access to affordable and nutritious food, and they typically exist in low-income neighborhoods. Food deserts are often associated with having access to unhealthy foods, corner stores, or oversupply of fast food. Our team was lucky enough to have partnered with the Alex Health Center on their community food center project, which has now been providing food access, food literacy, and education through gardening, cooking, wellness, and justice programs for nearly 4 years. The space is in a former restaurant building in the city's lowest income ward. It has become a real hub for the community, particularly young people who come in after school to line up for smoothies that they can blend through the pedal power of a bicycle system. The food center has been an incredible resource, and yet we haven't seen it replicated in the Alberta context. That said, some silver lining, the Food Centers of Canada recently announced that their 13th center has opened, and it's the first in none of it. So again, to come back to our roles, what I suggest here is that for planners, we find and support new and innovative ways to get fresh food to everyone, creating spaces for the different and innovative delivery. Access is also supported by municipalities through initiatives like public land plantings, whereby the flowers and grasses municipalities provide and maintain are replaced by gardens and fruit-bearing shrubs and trees. We can shift resources to grow flora that have edible and educational results. Additionally, there's a role for planners in advocating for food security, meaning that you create and share resources that help establish a basic level of literacy among the population you serve. So reconnecting people to food is crucial, and seeing it is a big part of that. Supporting local and regional food supply can seem like a nice to have or superfluous matter, but in reality, it's so much more. It's the ability to truly be resilient in the long term. So where do I see our role? Well, assisting community level food programs is one, but internally as a government or municipalities, we can really push for a transition of decorative landscapes to more edible and natural landscapes on public lands. And by natural, I mean native species, things that support not just our nutrition, but other elements of biodiversity, like bee habitat. Finally, I'm going to get into food waste, or ideally, food recovery. Food waste recovery differs from food waste in that it's not wasted at all. Rather than ending up in the landfill, recovery is the diversion, management, and utilization of food scraps for soil and fuel. So of course, this doesn't touch on the packaging element of food, but we have seen much momentum from all levels of government and countries across the world when it comes to things like banning single-use plastics. So again, for the sake of simplicity, I'm strictly speaking to organic materials for today. So making the most of our food is important, and regeneration is a big part of that. And what this means is, rather than letting our scraps suffocate in plastic bags for all of time, we should really focus on returning them and their nutrients back to the soil or other higher and better uses. One of my favorite lines by Wayne Roberts, who's a food expert out of Ontario, is that nature doesn't have landfills, only human civilizations create those. He goes on to talk about how municipalities, in fact, spend more money collecting, hauling, landfilling, and maintaining landfills, where compost and biofuel are actually money makers and job creators. Recently, our firm has had the privilege of working with the Recycling Council of Alberta on road mapping circular economies with a handful of municipalities around the province. While uncovering the unique landscape and context of each, we found with Lethbridge, it was surfaced that there's an informal program going on whereby farmers from the surrounding area have established partnerships with commercial businesses to collect their food scraps as a means to feed livestock and create compost for crops. Although it's not a regulated procedure, the city is keen to increase their waste diversion and thus are just staying out of the way of this very innovative setup. So again, how might our waste management system be failing to divert nutrient-rich scraps from the landfill? And what can we do to avoid this? Well, of course, we have some good news stories in places like Calgary and Edmonton, where compost facilities have recently been established to support the reuse of organic materials. However, this is not the reality for every community. So I again urge you to talk to your residents, your food-involved businesses, and other stakeholders to understand the desires they have when it comes to food and byproduct waste. Again, a big part of the planner's role in all of this is dialogue. And until we know what our community's unique challenges and assets are, we can't tailor the solutions to optimize waste recovery. So working with your local community, find better ways to leverage food scraps before it becomes trash and costs us all. So to recap, and first, I'll review the lessons list, which are the 6 key takeaways I hope you learn from or challenge you in your role as a planner to take. And again, these are reviewing your land use and similar bylaws for language that might discriminate against growing food, supporting new and innovative ways of getting fresh food to everyone, finding new and innovative ways for food to grow in urban centers, replacing decorative landscaping with edible landscapes, creating political buy-in, and working with your local community to find better ways to leverage food scraps. And yes, let's remember, even urban centers can support the local and regional system. Urban agriculture has many benefits to our stomachs, wallets, communities, and minds. We know there's relationships to be built, environments to be nurtured, and learning to be had. So ideally, there's no time like the present. As we face major economic changes in this province related to both COVID and global oil prices, there is a huge opportunity to lift our local economic system through the enhancement and widespread adoption of local and regional or resilient food. So all to say, it's a big risk to do nothing. So go, get your hands